Welcome to the Being Human UT podcast, where Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus will discuss issues relative to the humanities and technology at Utah Tech University. And now your hosts for Being Human UT podcast, Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus.
Welcome to the Being Human Utah Tech podcast. I'm Randy Jasmine. I'm here with my co-host, Jim Hindigus. We have a guest from the Utah Tech Library, Eva Sanchez, who we're going to talk to during this episode. And we're really excited to hear about perspectives about the library. And before we went on air, Jim was talking about how he and I have talked about how libraries were in the past. And we're looking forward to hearing from Eva about how libraries are now. And also before the program, I was thinking, Eva, you're one of our few guests that we've had that have been, not of our generation or before our generation. So your perspective on everything we talk about today, I think, is going to be very, very valuable. So welcome. And I know Jim has some questions for you.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eva. My first question really for you is that you're located in the library. How do you see the role of the university library changing right now in the more kind of digital and online spaces? I say that Randy's almost generationally. For us, it's a big shift. For a lot of our students, it's not a shift. It's what they've grown up with. So how do you see sort of how the library is evolving right now?
Yeah, with this question, I actually consulted a little bit with another librarian because I was kind of like, how do I consider this question? Is this like our library or libraries in general, academic libraries? And I also I came to this university as a student in 2013. I took classes with Randy Jasmine, actually, and then I went on to get my Master's of Library Science. And so the academic library at Utah Tech, from when I was a student to now, has changed so minimally. Yes, we have increased digital technologies and resources for students, and that's always going to be the case. But it is, when I was talking to my coworker, he pointed out university libraries as a whole are in a state of equilibrium. So when I started as a student, he was working in libraries, and he said from 13 years ago to now, there has not been much change. And I think I can really agree with that. And I also have a coworker who just completed 40 years at Utah Tech Library. Before that was Dixie. She was over in the Snow building when they had the library there. She has just so much background knowledge of this is how we used to do things, and this is how we do things now. And I think that core is still there. We have a very stable environment at academic libraries. And because we have what is the word I'm thinking about? We live in a capitalist society. So until, people that give us those online resources change their business model, then the academic library has to change things and adjust. But we don't get to make that call to change things from a database provider, right? We could say all we want, what we wish they would do for us, but until they make those decisions to change things, it's not up to us, right? So I wish that every, EBSCOhost or ProQuest had a slew of librarians that they consulted with, but they don't. And so I think that the library is generally in a state of equilibrium as of lately, with the slow creep of inflation. We had a contract deal with Utah Academic Library Consortium that purchased EBSCOhost. So that got us all the database package that we have. They make an agreement with all of the Utah academic libraries to get us the best deal. With inflation, they had a big jump, something like, 30 to 40% more than what we were paying the year previous. And when we were in talks of hey, can we work out a better deal? This isn't feasible for a lot of libraries, especially small ones like ours. And they didn't want to work with us, so we're moving on to ProQuest Central. So that creates change. That creates adjustment not only for the librarians, but our relationship with the faculty as well, to say, okay, like if you linked things into your Canvas course shell, if you sent articles and things to your students with permalinks, those will have to be updated, and we'll just have to see and, hope for the best that you could still find those resources that you want, or we can help you find new resources. But one of the big ones is Academic Search Ultimate. We will be losing that. It also will correspond way differently with our discovery layer on our website. So if you go to library.utah.tech.edu, where it searches all the databases there, that will change. So we are adjusting now based again on the business model changing first. So we will go into a contract with ProQuest instead, and we will have to adjust to the changes. I still think a majority of librarians are actually quite positive when it comes to change. I think this is what librarians are good at. It's the adjustment. It's riding technological waves. It's understanding, like, we do have librarians of different generations. So understanding how things worked back then and how we can take those models and apply it to now. But one way that I see that, for example, we're a polytechnic university now. You might think to yourself, well, what does a polytechnic library look like? And in 2013, I guess there was like a Florida Polytechnic University opened up a library. They were new, and they are a library completely void of any physical books. So the only physical books that they have in their library are got through interlibrary loan, and everything else is online, digital. Like, you have to be a digital nomad. Your skills for digital searching have to be on point. They have librarians to help you with the digital searching, but they just don't have any books. So with Utah Tech Library and the institutional goals being polytechnic and technology, we will never throw away the collection we already have. So we will be in a state of equilibrium, ready to jump into where the institutional needs are. But will it change drastically? Probably not. But do I have wishful I have wishful thinkings of where I would hope it would go? Yes. I do hope that, like, for Atwood Innovation Plaza with their makerspace, with IT, with the Student Resource Center, I do wish that a lot of those resources for students were more central with the library, so it can be kind of like a one-stop shop. And I think as long as I'm here, that I would suggest that when those things come up. But it's not going to be something quick, I don't think. But in the long term, I do hope that this academic library can pair up with other digital technology resources on campus, and also the bookstore. I just think that would be a really smart move, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, something I don't think faculty know enough or think enough about, or at least I'll just speak for myself as a faculty member. We don't realize how much the economy and how much well, there's resources down there, and the students should use those resources, but we don't often know the availability of those resources based upon the economy. So, I mean, that's good information or a good reminder, at least for me as a faculty member. One of the things too, it's so funny. I mean, I'll be sarcastic here and say faculty are really good at adjusting to change as well. And so we'll have to adjust a little bit with availability and with databases for now. But, I think there's still that core within faculty that want to have students understand what research is, have students use the library, and have this be something that's an important part of their academic life. If you see equilibrium happening, there's sort of a sort of stabilization when it comes to what the library looks like. Do you see students researching differently? We had a guest last time, Brett, that really talked about the graduate student experience and the undergraduate experience in researching in a more digital age. So do you see students researching differently, or is it just, or have they been researching the same way for a while?
I think that it's not so much the methods that students are using that change the way they research. It's more the students, right? The student body, every year they're going to get younger and we're going to get older. And as these younger generations that have always been online and there's this term, digital nomads. So you would think when you hear that term, well, then you must be really good at this, or you must have some pretty basic research skills built into your brain. And that's not the case. And I work mostly with the undergraduate, which I'm glad that I do, because that's when it's really effective to teach the research skills that librarians can early on, and go into classrooms, get them comfortable with coming to the library and talking to librarians when they need it. But I have seen that shift with the younger students, the ones that you think would be so good at it. They're still struggling. And they're struggling for a myriad of reasons. But when you're online all the time, and the way that technology is changing nowadays, especially AI, it only gets better and better. So you might see some conspiracy theory online that really, really looks true. And also, I know we have a huge population of first-generation students, and I relate to the first-generation students a lot because I am one. When you go to school and start talking about research, you realize that you are sharpening and changing the way that you think, the way that you critically think, and the way that you process comprehension, right? So it is extremely difficult and could be researched to see if this is why people struggle with their mental health when they come to college. But it's like you're over here in school learning about research while your parents are telling you like about a conspiracy theory at home that they really buy into, that they really want you to worry about, that they care about you. And hey, have you heard this online? Or they go on TikTok or they go on social media and they're seeing things that for all intents and purposes looks real. So it could be, I think that is a really hard mental adjustment to know that if you're going to be a critical thinker, that you have to maybe tell even mom and dad, like, that's not true. Where are you getting this? Can I look at that with you? That's a big adjustment for coming from first gen to being an academic student and hopefully a graduate. But I do think that when I'm in undergraduate classrooms doing study sessions, I still have students, about one or two every class, whether or not that's a large or small class, that will tell me like, hey, we're doing this paper about, what is it called? Doing a, what is the term I'm thinking of? Like you're trying to convince someone in your paper, right?
Argument paper?
Yes.
Good.
But they'll say, can I use this source? And then they'll show me sources that they find from Truth Social. They'll find me sources that they found on really sketchy websites, or they'll show me things they found on Twitter or X. And I just kind of sit there like, really? Like let's look at this critically, right? Without offending, but to gently guide them into, we really have to look at where we're getting these sources from. Or sometimes they'll say like, look, I saw it on social media. Now I need to find resources that back that up. And they're having a hard time because what they saw wasn't true. And so that's where I'm seeing like the biggest struggle with working with undergraduate students in this area in particular with Southern Utah students is we're still having that be a big issue. How do I see research changing? Well, like I said, the equilibrium is there where the models and databases, the interfaces on databases don't change a lot. So luckily we're able to really show a student how to use any database, right? If they come to you and they say, I want to write about law, it's like, well, great, we'll learn how to use that database together. And I don't see that changing for them, but just almost like the amount of things and resources on a database are only increasing in quality. They're only increasing in quantity. And I think that for students, they just have to, the need to be a better researcher is stronger than ever before, right? So I think as long as there are librarians on an academic campus, they're willing to help, or English faculty that are willing to help those research needs, that we will, again, continue on the equilibrium. But I don't know if you guys ever saw that with students kind of giving sources that you were just like, where did you get this from? But it just happens. It's just a reality, I think, with social media and things. They'll open a link that looks legitimate, but when you're looking at that, you're like, whoa, let's take a step back here. I don't know.
I have a couple of comments to make, maybe not any questions, and maybe comments that none of us here have any power over. When you talk about the increase cost for things like EBSCO host databases and, it kind of pricing itself out of the range of small universities, I can't help but think about like newspapers and how newspapers developed, and some when they went online started to charge people right away, others didn't, and kind of making that decision often was whether or not that newspaper survived or not. And my thought is, if EBSCO, taking Academic Search Ultimate as an example, is taking these scholarly peer-reviewed articles and making them so expensive that smaller libraries can't afford them. I mean, who's buying them? Who's going to keep buying these articles? These are not things that are popular, that are going to just sell based on people's popular demand for them. And it just seems a very short-sighted decision to kind of do that. We know there's a lot of paywalls out there. My students will always say, well, why can't I just use Google Scholar? And I say, well, you can find some decent sources on Google Scholar, but inevitably you're going to run into a paywall. And then, now I'm going to have to modify this, because I say, and that's why we have, the university, and the university library pays for these subscriptions. But now, of course, we're having trouble doing that. And then my second observation is more of a critical assessment of my position. I think I've avoided a lot of what you've been talking about in terms of helping students to determine what's valuable and what's credible and what's not credible, because I basically have said this. Yes, I'll talk about, don't use clearly non-scholarly, non-credible sources, but I kind of drag them into the world of the databases. And once I drag them into the world of the databases, I don't have to spend a lot of time talking about, conspiracy theory sources. Okay. They're getting sometimes better. The biggest thing is, this study really isn't in the most prominent journal. This study isn't as extensive and as frequently cited as these other studies. There's still quality concerns, but I have them in the world of scholarly peer-reviewed sources. So now I think it's clear that, one, like you were saying earlier, I'm going to have to become more familiar with and more comfortable using the kinds of resources we do have access to. And two, I'm going to have to spend more time talking about the very things that you just talked about. That do we really go to the internet at large? Do we really go to a Google search? Do we really go to social media when we want to find a source, when we've been asked to complete what we would have to describe as an academic task? And if we do, how can we judge which sources are credible and which sources aren't credible? So, those are kind of my thoughts on it. You said capitalism right away, and I've been doing some reading since the semester ended, and I just was struck the other day when I was reading a line from Frederick Jameson where he said, we as human beings can envision the end of the world, but we can't envision the end of capitalism. And as soon as I thought about that, I'm like, that is so true. I mean, capitalism has such a powerful global hold that in our minds, we couldn't even imagine what an alternative to that would be. And in this scenario, the alternative would be, hey, the good stuff would be out there. The credible stuff would be out there. And if we wanted to access it, if our students wanted to access it, they could. But we live in a world where that's not entirely true. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for your thoughts, Randy. I was thinking when you were talking about that first generation experience, I was a first generation student as well, and there's these weird moments where you kind of go home for the summer and you are faced with, I might not agree with the things that my parents agree with, and that's a big shift in a student's life. I mean, I think that's one of the more pivotal moments where not only do I not agree, but I maybe just have a different angle or a different approach to it. And I mean, I always kind of got mad at my parents when we would disagree about ideas. I'm like, well, you supported me going to college and thinking for myself. you supported me, trying to research and trying to get all this, these to expand my viewpoints on different topics and to pursue credible source material. And it kind of silenced them just a little bit when they saw that I was working towards developing my mind and developing critical thinking. I'm like, oh yeah, well, I guess that's what we wanted you to do. I mean, deep down, maybe they just wanted me to get a job, but they wanted me to think critically. But I think the role of the library is so crucial. And I feel like my composition courses are becoming more focused on finding credible sources now, because it's just something that I maybe took for granted, or at least when I was in college, it wasn't as big of a topic because the access to less credible sources was not the same. I mean, I guess maybe somebody could have snuck something into the library that was not incredibly credible, or that somebody had to discern whether something was not credible. But, there was a lot of trust in the fact that the library would weed out what is credible and what is not. But with the internet, it's just a free-for-all. And like Randy said, I mean, you've got to direct them towards that credible source. And it can be tough.
Well, there's still that phrase, right? Like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. And it feels like that sometimes with the students. Like, I can show you what credible sources are. I can show you non-scholarly versus scholarly. I can show you how to use these databases all day long. But whether or not you go home, and if you still believe in conspiracy theories, I can't change that. Even when you show them that, I mean, I saw that, again, the very young generation, or people between 19 to 24 or something, they're still really susceptible to false information online and the spreading of it. Obviously, it's spreading somehow. And they're so susceptible to that. So even if they are a generation that's strongly going to college, it's still difficult for them to maybe change that worldview. And it's also difficult, like, as a librarian for me, and coming out of the Hispanic, Latino community, and coming back into my family and saying, I have to pick my battles sometimes about, that's misinformation, and I'm going to now offend you by correcting you or whatever. But with my partner in particular, he grew up in Enterprise, Utah. And so, like, the way that they dealt with technology was a little bit different. He's 26 now, but he thought, like, oh, we didn't really grow up with a lot of technology in our high school. Doing the taking care of animals courses was more significant, or doing shop, than it was to go to the library and do research. So he kind of grew up that way. And he sometimes presents me with questions because he works in Cedar. He commutes to Cedar. He works in a very blue collar shop, a mechanic shop, and he does accounting for them. And some of the stuff that he hears at lunch, he'll come and tell me, like, well, you know what I heard today? And it's always this conspiracy theory about how, in a very specific and distinct ways, that the American life is threatened, that that the world is going to end in a very specific way on a specific date from a specific threat. And I always say, like, what are you talking about? And then I'll go and start looking up the keywords of what he told me, because, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. What are you talking about? There's going to be a huge solar flare and we're all going to die. So then I start researching and legitimately will find nothing. And I look at him like, where did your coworkers hear this? And they legitimately believe it. They do things, again, that's not harming anyone else. They'll maybe stockpile. They'll stockpile weapons, stockpile food. They'll build kind of like bunker style things in their homes, whatever it is. Like, it's not hurting anyone. But it definitely, like, puts fear in my partner to say, like, well, should we be doing that? And I'm like, I don't think so, right? So I'm like, I can't not be a librarian in this moment and tell you, like, if there was no sources on this, how could I believe it? And but his, again, his phone microphone, because he's around these conversations all the time, it picks it up. And then all of a sudden he's getting a bunch of conspiracy theory things on his social media. I'm like, it's just bizarre. Like, it's just bizarre, the world that we live in, depending on the environment that you're in, what you'll be exposed to, what you'll want to believe. And if you're seeing it all the time, how couldn't you believe it, right? So I wish that social media had a ton of librarian content just free-flowing in everyone's page, but it's not always the case. Unless you're looking for it, it won't show up. But digital literacy is really important. It will always be important. I think it's more important now maybe than before, because students are really doing a lot more digitally, and they might not ever touch a book physically, right? And they might not come into the library, but they'll still use the databases and still have assignments that require it. I also saw, when I was doing research about stuff for today, that students find it really significant. Younger students nowadays find it really significant to be taught how to have more digital literacy when they include social media in the mix, right? Because that's what they're doing. That's where their interests lay. That's what they do when they go home. So when you bring the real world into their lessons, that helps them. So I really thought that was impactful. I thought when I go into classrooms that I will consider that. Talking to students and having a connection with them, maybe have like a focus group and say, well, like, how could I teach this more effectively to you, right? So I don't know, just some thoughts about everything. It's just interesting.
Interesting or terrifying? Well, I mean, I think about that in terms of, the internet is done this amazing thing where there's so much access to information, but also what I'm guessing what's happened with your partner, or at least the communities that your partner's in, is that there's sort of insulated communities that don't want to interact with the larger sphere or of truth or at least objectivity, and so they find their spaces where the information appeals to them, and then they don't branch out. And so somewhere like the library is a place where it contains all sorts of things, all sorts of conflicting, not necessarily conflicting in certain truths, but conflicting in different approaches and just a broad spectrum of understanding. And sometimes, at least in my experience with human nature, people don't love that. People just really like, I want to hang out with the people who think the same way as I do. I want to hang out with the people who have the same, that don't necessarily challenge me in my thoughts. I'm like, we're going to get together and we're all going to think this particular way. And that can be definitely dangerous. As a member of the university, I try to get students out of that. You came here to interact with different ideas. And I always tell my students, I'm not going to convince you to think a certain way. I'm going to convince you to think. I'm going to convince you to make sure that you consider all these ideas, that if you say, oh, well, that's a dumb idea, I want you to know why. I almost want you to know more why you disagree with that viewpoint than why you agree with your own viewpoint. Because if you were so solidly against that, you should be researching it. But sometimes I fear that the people, they get into their insulated corners, and the internet's an amazing, place for that. You can find lots of little dark corners where people can just reinforce their viewpoints. So,
yeah, I agree with that. I was just going to say I would agree with that. I think that, what happened during the pandemic is proof positive that there are going to be people who are going to let whatever it is, the conspiracy theories that we've been talking about, political partisanship, we were faced with this reality, and the most expert people in the world were trying to tackle this problem from a medical standpoint. And look at all of the pushback that there was from people who just, wanted to go down the road of conspiracy theories, and it went to the point of discrediting experts, discrediting science. And I'm not saying everybody did that. I'm probably not even saying the majority of people said those kinds of things. But we certainly had a significant proportion of the world's population pushing back against what was clearly the most valid and reliable evidence that we had about what was going on. And, that was definitely, to me, very strong proof of how powerful, we say the internet in general, but I think, we've used the term social media a couple of times and those kinds of things. Eva, let me ask you this. Do you have any specifics about how we can, in fact, incorporate social media a little bit into our teaching? I know you said you've been considering it with the sessions that you do, but what about, in the classroom, what are some practical things we might do?
I honestly don't know, because I've just started considering it now. And also at the age range that I'm at, a lot of millennial people really have a disconnect with social media because we've had our fair share of years to be into it. And then we think, this is a lot of effort. And this is a lot of garbage that you have to sift through to get to some good stuff. So I have a general disconnect with social media. I know a lot about it. I know how to use it. But I'm really not in tune with how young people use social media nowadays. I know that they use different types of social media that people in my generation are more uncomfortable with. So I think that it really just requires more research. It requires asking the students that are here at Utah Tech, what is it that you like to do on social media? Why? Have there been times that you saw something on social media and you questioned, is this real? But I don't know. Maybe it would be going out and hunting for something that you can prove that it is false and showing it to people and showing the statistics. Like, look, it has this many likes. And how could we disprove this? Or how can you prove something, right, that you find on social media? That might be a great way. But no, I haven't really thought about it too hard. But library faculty are here 12 months a year. So I was going to spend the summer digging into it a little bit. And another thing that I was thinking about that came up when you guys were talking right now, I went to library school online in 2022 and then finished up in May of 2023. And the number one topic that came up in every single class, every single group Zoom, and every discussion, it seems, was the threat to libraries, right? The threat to freedom of speech and the pushing of censorship. So again, 2020 happened. A lot of us were at home twiddling our thumbs and like, what are we going to do? And there were some parents that really kind of put that forward, this idea of like, there is a threat, and the threat is librarians, and the threat is libraries, public ones in particular, school libraries in particular, and in particular states. And it became political, even though sometimes you might think like libraries are a non-political space, but we also get all our money from state or local governments. So it does become political. So again, the academic library is in a state of equilibrium where we at Utah Tech Library in particular have not had a single book ban suggestion. We haven't had a single challenge to any books at the academic library, which I'm thankful for. But in other states, like in particular Idaho or Texas or Florida, they're being decimated. And how do I know that? Well, I do interlibrary loan for our library. So we lend to other libraries and we borrow from other libraries. And those states are borrowing from us a lot heavier now because some, like, for example, banned books, even if it's a young adult novel, we have it here and they've been told they need to get rid of it. They can't carry it on the shelves. They can't have it in their catalog. Otherwise, there's repercussions. And there are also a ton of open jobs in these states for librarians because I came into the workforce like, oh, where will I get a job? Definitely not these states because I don't want to be under the gun that way. And I'm a huge proponent for freedom of speech, and that just irks me. And it irked me that it had to be the number one topic that we talked about all the time. So I know that book banning and freedom of speech and copyright wasn't necessarily something that was on the original questions, but it's something that definitely comes up. And I would say that a lot of librarians are, especially here at Utah Tech, they're so pro freedom of speech and that you should have the choice to look up whatever book you want. And if somebody comes to interlibrary loan and they want a book about a conspiracy theory, I get that for them. I said, that's your freedom to look into what you want to look into. But if your professor does or doesn't accept that, that's also their choice. But anyways, like it's just interesting to see like where the challenges of libraries, whether or not it's political, whether or not there's conspiracies, it does eventually come around to damage if it has enough traction, has enough people behind it. I know in particular AI has been a part of it as well, that people might look through this catalog and see where these keywords are, and all of those books, I want to ban those. That's pretty scary. It's alarming. It's not something that I'm ever hoping to deal with. But it was difficult to see students in my cohort that were in Idaho or Texas saying like, well, what am I going to do when it comes time to get a job? Or I'm already in a library and I'm already being challenged all the time. Like I should know everything that's in every book, and I don't know that. So it's just interesting. This is another topic. I don't know if you guys have anything to share on book banning or freedom of speech when it comes to classrooms, but.
Oh, I mean, I've got plenty to say about that. But I mean, just a clarification, because I always kind of think about this when a library, if a state bans a book, that library can get that book from another university, and that's sort of a workaround for them. Because that's interesting. I mean, I always kind of think about that, and I always kind of rolling my eyes or just kind of frustrated at the gesture sometimes of banning books in the United States, is that you can still buy those things on Amazon. And so in some ways it almost even kind of surges their popularity. But when someone says, oh, well, this book's inappropriate, I don't want it to be available, we live in a society where that can be available. But I mean, I mainly am frustrated with what it does to what kind of pressure it does put on librarians. Because I mean, to vilify people who are trying to give more information to people in society is a strange enemy that people make. and so yeah, I mean, it is frustrating, because it's almost, I've always thought with book banning, it's creating a different enemy. You're vilifying the book as opposed to educating people to how to process a book. So when a parent, say, wants to ban a book because it has language or sexual content or something like that, it's all about, well, just get rid of the book, as opposed to, hey, let's train people to process this information. And one of my big frustrations, especially with having children, is that, I can see that the more that you just say, let's just not talk about it, the more that these people have an inability to deal with topics, and then they act them out in a kind of usually inappropriate way. Having teenagers, I know my kids are exposed to language. And so it's not going to be a book that's going to teach my child certain language. It's going to be the children in the playground. And having been a teenager myself, it wasn't like I listened to, it wasn't the music and the movies that, my parents were always concerned about the language and content of the media that I was consuming. That wasn't what taught me. It was my peers. And so, I mean, the educators and the role models in my life. And so if we can steer people, but I'll get off of my soapbox on that, but to make this target on the library and the books is always kind of frustrating, because I mean, I almost wish that if people want to have a list of banned books, then don't ban them, highlight them and say, these are the books that you should read with your children, and decide how to process this information. But that's another whole other thing to talk about, because I don't think those parents necessarily want to read those books. Maybe they should be, but
we only have a couple more minutes here, and I wanted to maybe change gears a little bit. Our focus on this podcast is technology and humanity. I know that you have been involved with a great program that you do, the the Silent Book Club. And this connects to us and in the English department and our connection to you in the library. We've loved being in the Holland building. We are moving the new classroom building. Once that's built, I know some student services entities are going to come in and replace us. I just know from 12 years residence in the building how popular the quiet, and even though the fourth floor, unlike the third floor, isn't officially a silent study space, I know how popular those quiet study spaces on the fourth floor are. Always occupied, always used. And as we hear about, well, we don't need stacks anymore. We don't need books. Library space can shrink the library. Are you worried about losing some of those quiet study spaces that are so valuable to so many of our students, particularly our students who, maybe are introverted students who aren't, who learn best and function best when they're not being overwhelmed with sensations, people talking and people visiting and things like that. Do you in the library have a concern about those very, very valuable quiet spaces?
Just based off of that word equilibrium again, I don't think that the spaces are threatened. I just think that the library in the Holland building, right, because the library is inside the Holland, it is definitely, they can't take any more things on, right? Because I think we ended up building in the graduate study space on 2M, which is next to the Patent, Trademark, and Resource Center, which was built in the last, I think, year. And then we built, what is it called? It's on the second floor, and they do a special training on that website, and I'm forgetting what it's called.
Pluralsight.
Pluralsight was put in, and I thought, whenever we put something new in, minus the graduate study space, we're taking away study space. We're taking away places where collaborative thinking can happen, where people can collaborate, where people can study in peace or on a floor that it's not mitigated as much. But the students really desire that. I think that it is a very popular request for the students to say, we want more. We want more study rooms, and we want the library to be open 24/7. And there are some things, again, just institutionally with the amount of growth that we have to be resigned to the fact that might not happen instantly. But we do hope that it will happen in the future and that we can meet those needs. I know that they have this space that's going to tear down the SAC. They're going to put in a student center. I mean, it'll be a couple of years, but I think that will help partially meet those needs that the students have for a third space. But the library, just like the public library here in St. George, that's just a couple of blocks that way. I don't know if you guys have ever been there in the middle of the day, but our students are there studying as well. So they're seeking these spaces, and they're seeking a third place where they don't have to spend money to be there, where they can have their space respected and they can get some help, right? If they get up and say, hey, can you help me assess this or find this book? The help is there. So I think that I'm not too worried that it is threatened. I just think that we're pretty happy with what we have right now. It could be better, but whether or not that will change instantly, probably not. I think we're trying the best we can with what we have, and we are weeding and getting rid of certain things in the collection. Like, I know we've drastically changed how many periodicals we subscribe to. They're no longer on floor 2M. Now they're on floor 2 because we have less than half. The rest are available online. But whenever those things happen, we just kind of adjust what we can. But whether or not that will mean a huge reduction in the collection, probably not. We're always adding, because one of your questions on the email was, do students still read physical books? And they do. And because of Trailblazer Book Club, right, or Silent Book Club, I know that they do because they show up with books that they even buy personally for their own reading for pleasure. Students still prefer a physical book over an ebook, and that's about 60% of the time. I saw different statistics online, but it looked like that was an average. And then for me personally as well, it's like, well, I like a physical book as well. And there has been research done that you can retain information differently when you're reading the book in your hands as opposed to online. And that's interesting, but also feels true because I remember the books I read in my undergrad, but I don't really remember the articles, and I don't remember the ebooks. So yes, they're still reading. There's still a demand. There's a need there. And for me personally, I prefer the book, but I also just prefer whatever way is free, right? So it's like, oh, if it's going to be on Overdrive or Libby, is it free? Okay, I'll accept it free in whatever way and capacity. I'm a librarian, but I never spend money on books. And anyways, I might have lost sight of the question there for a second, but...
No, I think, I think you touched on a lot of the things that I was thinking about. Sergeant, go ahead.
Oh no, I agree. That was a great answer because I think about it's intertwined with this conversation is where students study, where they are. I've always been pretty vocal about when I first started this at this institution in 2010. One of my first questions was where the students study. Like, I think they had the Gardner, and the Snow building was where the library was at. And even then, it just didn't feel like a big space. You need all these, part of the university life is having these little spaces where students can kind of hide and study. And yeah, I just didn't see that as much. And I mean, in some ways, I'm glad they're using the public library. I mean, I'm really glad they're using the public library, but there's also this indicator of if they're using the public library, which is maybe a mile or two away, we need to have more spaces on campus for them to not have to go off campus to study. But, maybe they like that. Maybe like going to coffee shops and public libraries, that those are good places to study.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eva. Thank you for your insights, and we really appreciate hearing from you and your continued work on finding out what it is that students need from the library. And even though in a few years we will be moving out of that building, we certainly in the English department want to stay very strongly connected to the library and all of the things that that you were doing. So, Jim, do you want to take us out of here?
Oh, I almost never do this. I don't think, have I ever ended us?
I don't know. I don't know if you ever have.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. We might have one or two episodes up our sleeve until the next season, but until now, or until then, I don't even know how to end this.
Practice. Practice is where you get them.
Practice. I'll practice my endings, and then I'll get better at this. But thank you for joining us for Being Human UT.
This has been the Being Human UT podcast with Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigas. Please follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. From Utah Tech University, this is the Being Human UT podcast.